In this tutorial, we'll demonstrate how to deploy an application version using the objects that were created in earlier tutorials. All of the previous tutorials were used to create all of the objects necessary to perform this deployment. Let's review these objects. The domain named Day1 was created as a place to put the application base version named Day1App. The credential named Day1Cred is an example of a credential. One is typically used to provide the username and password to the endpoint, and another to access the files in the repository. In this case, we're pulling the files from and deploying to the same server, which is the local machine, so that no credential is actually necessary. We put the credential into these two objects just to show how it was done in the earlier tutorials. The environment named Day1env contains the endpoint named Day1ep, which is a DeployHub object that represents the local machine in this case. The component version named Day1comp and the component item it contains named comp-item1 are used to reference the repository Day1 repo and the files it contains. A component version can contain many different component items, making for a tremendous amount of flexibility and control over a deployment. We use just one of each for this tutorial in order to keep things simple. The application base version named Day1App contains the component version Day1comp. An application version can contain many components. An application version is deployed along with all of its components and their component items to an environment, which contains one or more endpoints. The deploy task named Day1Deploy is used to perform the actual deployment. Tasks are created within a domain or lifecycle state and allow the user to deploy application versions or move application versions between domains for the purposes of organization and security. Now let's create another environment with its own endpoint within the dev lifecycle state. This is typical of a software lifecycle where the deployment team has their own environment and wants to deploy software to the endpoints within it. Click on the data center view along the top. Right-click on the dev lifecycle state within the dev1 domain. Select New Environment in this domain. Enter the name of the environment as dev-env, then click OK. Right-click on dev-env in the tree structure. Select New Endpoint in this environment. Enter the name as dev-ep. Select Unix as the endpoint type. Enter localhost as the host name. Select SFTP as the protocol. and target as the base directory. Select global day1 cred as the credential. Since we're deploying to a local host, we don't really need a credential, but we'll do it anyway here just to show how it's done. Click OK. Click on the Deploy view along the top. Click on the Applications tab. Click on the Day 1 app version 1 within the dev lifecycle state. This is the one we're going to actually deploy, which is a version of the Day 1 app application base version. Click on the Assigned Environments tab. Click on the plus sign on the far right and select Dev ENV in the Day 1 dev lifecycle state. Then click OK. This tells DeployHub that the Day 1 app version 1 can be deployed into the Dev ENV environment. Make sure there are directories and files in the same server where DeployHub is installed. Create a directory under the root directory named target. And create another one named source files. Create as many files as you want within the source files directory. These are going to be placed into the target directory on the same machine. Keep in mind that this is a simplified example for this tutorial, which allows us to demonstrate DeployHub basics without having to access several servers on a network. At this point, we've performed every step necessary in order to deploy the files from source files to target. Now let's deploy the application version that we've built. Click on the Deploy view along the top. Click on the Applications tab. Click on the plus sign to the left of the dev lifecycle state within the Day 1 domain in the tree structure to see the Day 1 app. Right-click on Day 1 app. Select Deploy Day 1 in the resulting drop-down list. Make sure that the Day 1 ENV environment will be deployed to by selecting it from the environment list. Click OK. Now click on the Timeline tab and click on the top line in the list on the uppermost deployment number. Click on the General tab. This contains general information about the deployment. It includes the exit code, which should be 0 to show there are no errors. Click on the Log tab. Any errors that prevent a deployment from taking place will be shown in red. Now click on the Files tab. Notice that in this example, there are the names of the files and a directory that were copied from the source files directory to the target directory. Go back to the command line and look at the target directory. Notice that all of the files that are in the source files directory are now also in the target directory. This concludes the deployment tutorial. DeployHub's capabilities go far beyond what has been shown in this tutorial series.